February 1942. A 37-year-old naval commander sits alone in a dim office in San Diego, staring at 2 matchsticks on his desk. Outside, the Pacific burns. 43 American pilots have fallen in 43 dogfights, their Wildcats outmaneuvered by faster, lighter Japanese Zeros. Every engagement follows the same deadly pattern. American pilots try to turn with the enemy and die. But tonight, as John Thach crosses those 2 matchsticks, he sees something no one else has seen, a pattern that will save thousands of lives. Peterson, break left. Break left. Commander John Thach gripped the radio handset so hard his knuckles went white. Static, then nothing. Through the tower window at Naval Air Station North Island, the morning sky stretched empty and indifferent. February 8, 1942. 06:30 hours. Somewhere over Wake Island, his 44th pilot had just stopped answering. Thach set down the handset. His hand didn't shake. Not anymore. Not after 44. The door banged open. Lieutenant Commander Donald Lovelace walked in carrying a clipboard and a face that said he'd rather be anywhere else. Sir McCluskey's preliminary report just came through from Enterprise. Thach took the paper. 3 paragraphs. He only needed to read the first sentence. 2 more Wildcats down near Marcus Island, both pilots attempting standard pursuit maneuvers against enemy fighters. That makes 46, sir. I can count Don. Silence filled the space between them. Outside, a Wildcat's engine coughed to life on the flight line. 14 cylinders, 1,200 horsepower, 7,000 pounds of American engineering that kept losing to a lighter, faster enemy. Lovelace shifted his weight. The pilots are asking questions, sir. They want to know why we keep flying the same way when it keeps getting them killed. What do you tell them? I tell them to follow orders and trust their training. And do they believe you? Lovelace looked at his boots. No, sir, I don't even believe me. Thach walked to the wall map. Red pins everywhere. Japanese fighters spotted from Wake to Java to the Philippines. Blue pins marking American positions growing fewer each week. He'd been staring at this map for 63 days. 63 days since Pearl Harbor turned the world upside down. 63 days of watching the red pins multiply while the blue ones disappeared. How old is Ensign Bassett? 24, sir. And O'Hare, 27. I'm 37, Don. You know what that means. I'm old enough to be their father. And I'm sending them up to die because some manual written in 1938 says that's how you fight an enemy aircraft. Lovelace said nothing. What could he say? Thach turned from the map. Get the squadron together. Briefing room, 1 hour, all pilots. Sir, we're not scheduled for 1 hour, Don. I need to tell them something before I send them up again. After Lovelace left, Thach sat at his desk and pulled out the technical specifications for the F4F Wildcat. He'd memorized these numbers weeks ago, but he kept reading them anyway, searching for something he'd missed. Maximum speed, 318 miles per hour. Service ceiling, 34,900 feet. Rate of climb, 2,303 feet per minute. Turn radius at combat speed approximately 12 seconds for a complete 360-degree turn. He opened another folder. Intelligence estimates on the Mitsubishi A6M0. Maximum speed, 331 miles per hour. Only 13 miles per hour faster, but that wasn't what mattered. Turn radius under 7 seconds. 7 versus 12. In aerial combat, 5 seconds was eternity. The mathematics were simple and brutal. American pilots engaged enemy fighters. American pilots turned to pursue because that's what the manual said. The Zero turned tighter. The American tried to match it. The Wildcat approached stall speed. The Zero completed its loop and appeared behind the American. 4 seconds later, 20mm cannon shells shredded aluminum and flesh. 46 times this had happened. 46 times American pilots had done exactly what they were trained to do. 46 times they died doing it. Thach closed the folders and pulled open his desk drawer. Inside sat a small cardboard box from his wife Betty. She sent these packages from Pittsburgh every few weeks. This one contained cigarette soap, a letter about their daughter's piano recital, and a small box of wooden matches. He'd been staring at those matches for 3 days. At 0800 hours, 23 pilots crammed into the briefing room. Young faces, scared faces trying hard not to look scared. Thach recognized that expression. He'd worn it himself once a long time ago before he'd learned that fear was just another instrument reading you had to ignore while flying. Lieutenant Edward Butch O'Hare sat in the front row, arms crossed. 27 years old, top of his class at Pensacola, letters to his mother every Sunday without fail. Next to him, Ensign Edgar Bassett, farm kid from Iowa, who could rebuild a radial engine blindfolded. Behind them, the rest of Fighting Squadron 3. Young men whose mothers didn't know yet that their sons were flying obsolete aircraft against a superior enemy. Thach stood at the front. No notes. No manual. Just the weight of 46 names he couldn't forget. Gentlemen, in the past 8 weeks, the United States Navy has lost 46 pilots in air-to-air combat in the Pacific Theater. 46 men who graduated from Pensacola. 46 men who knew their aircraft. 46 men who followed their training manuals exactly. He paused. Let that sink in. Every single one of them died doing what they were taught to do. They engaged the enemy. They turned to pursue. They tried to outturn the Zero, and they died. O'Hare uncrossed his arms. Bassett leaned forward, every eye in the room locked on Thach. I'm not going to stand here and tell you the Wildcat is as good as the Zero. It's not. It's slower in level flight. It can't climb as fast. It can't turn as tight. On paper, we lose every time. Someone in the back row muttered something. Thach heard it anyway. You have something to say, Ensign? The young pilot stood. Thach didn't recognize him. New replacement probably arrived last week. Sir, if we can't outfly them, what are we supposed to do? Just wait to die? Sit down. I'm getting to that. The ensign sat. Thach walked to the blackboard and drew 2 aircraft, one pursuing the other. Standard tactical diagram. Current doctrine says when an enemy gets on your tail, you turn hard, try to get inside his turn radius. Reverse the situation. Makes sense. Heads nodded. Against the Zero that gets you killed, because you can't outturn him. You pull back on your stick. You slow down trying to match his turn, and suddenly you're below stall speed with no airspeed, no altitude, and no options. That's how Peterson died yesterday. That's how Williams died last week. That's how 44 men died since December. He erased the diagram and drew something new. 2 aircraft flying toward each other, crossing paths. What if we stopped trying to turn with them? The room went quiet. Dangerously quiet. O'Hare spoke up. Sir, are you suggesting we run away? No, Lieutenant. I'm suggesting we run toward each other. Thach drew arrows showing the flight paths. 2 Wildcats, section of 2. You fly together always. When one of you gets a Zero on his tail, you don't turn away. You turn toward your wingman. He turns toward you. You cross paths at high speed. Bassett stood. Sir, that's insane. We'd risk mid-air collision. Maybe. But think about what happens to the Zero pilot. He's chasing one of you. Suddenly there's another Wildcat coming straight at him, guns firing. What does he do? He breaks off, O'Hare said slowly. He has to. Nobody flies through head-on fire. Exactly. He breaks off and the pilot he was chasing escapes. Then you reverse cross, again create the same problem from a different angle. You keep doing it, keep crossing, keep forcing him to choose between staying on target or taking fire. You turn his advantage, his maneuverability, into a disadvantage. The new ensign raised his hand. Sir, what if he doesn't break off? What if he just shoots the guy he's chasing? Then his wingman shoots him. That's why you fly in pairs. That's why you trust the man next to you. Because this only works if you trust each other completely. Lovelace stood. Commander, respectfully, this violates every tactical doctrine we've been taught. You're asking pilots to turn away from an enemy on their tail. That's suicide. No, Don. What we're doing now is suicide. 46 dead pilots prove that. I'm asking them to try something different, something that might actually keep them alive. The room erupted. Questions, objections, arguments. Thach let them talk for 30 seconds, then raised his hand. Enough. Here's what's going to happen. Tomorrow morning, 0600 hours, I'm taking 4 aircraft up. We're going to practice this maneuver at low altitude over the ocean where nobody can see us screw up. O'Hare, Bassett, Lovelace. You're with me. The rest of you watch and learn. If this works, we train everyone. If it doesn't work..." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. O'Hare stood. "Sir, if you're asking us to trust you, I need to know, have you ever tried this before? No. Have you run calculations, simulations, anything? I crossed 2 matchsticks on my desk 3 nights ago. That's the extent of my research." The room went dead silent. "But I can tell you this, Lieutenant. I've sent 44 telegrams to 44 mothers in the past 8 weeks. I've written 44 letters explaining that their sons died following orders, following training, following doctrine. I'm not sending a 47th telegram if I can help it, so yes, this is untested. Yes, this is dangerous. Yes, this might fail spectacularly. But we know for certain what happens if we keep doing what we're doing. We die." Bassett spoke quietly. "Sir, when you crossed those matchsticks, what did you see?" Thach pulled the 2 wooden matches from his pocket. He'd been carrying them for 3 days. He held them up, crossed them in front of the room. "I saw 2 pilots protecting each other instead of dying alone. I saw geometry working for us instead of against us. I saw a way to turn 4 slow, heavy Wildcats into something a 0 pilot might actually be afraid of." He set the matches on the table. "Dismissed. Get some sleep. Tomorrow we find out if I'm a genius or if I'm about to kill us all." The pilots filed out slowly. O'Hare lingered near the door. "Sir, can I ask you something?" "Go ahead, Butch." "Why now? Why wait until 46 men died before trying something new?" Thach looked at the 2 matchsticks on the table. Such small things, a fraction of a penny each. But his wife had sent them 3,000 miles across a country at war, and now they might save lives or end them. "Because I didn't see it before. Because I was trained the same way you were, and I believed what I was taught. Because it took 46 dead pilots before I got desperate enough to cross 2 pieces of wood and imagine something different." O'Hare nodded slowly. "Sir, if this works, if we actually pull this off, you know they'll name it after you." "I don't care about names, Lieutenant. I care about keeping you alive long enough to write your mother next Sunday." After O'Hare left, Thach returned to his office. The sun had moved across the sky. Evening now. Through the window he could see ground crews servicing the Wildcats for tomorrow's test. Mechanics crawling over wings, checking control surfaces, loading ammunition. They didn't know tomorrow might change everything. Or end everything. He sat at his desk and pulled out writing paper. Force of habit. Every test flight required a preliminary report, even the unofficial ones you weren't supposed to tell the admiral about. But instead of technical specifications, he wrote a letter. "Betty, if you're reading this, something went wrong with a training exercise. I want you to know I wasn't reckless. I was trying to save lives. There's a difference. I've been thinking about those matches you sent. Funny how small things matter. You probably grabbed them without thinking, just something to fill space in the box. But I've been staring at them for 3 days, and they might have shown me how to keep these boys alive. Tomorrow I'm going to try something that will either make me look brilliant or get me court-martialed. Maybe both. But I can't keep sending telegrams to mothers. I can't keep watching boys climb into aircraft knowing they're going to die following orders. So I'm changing the orders. Tell Sarah I love her. Tell her Daddy tried to do the right thing. Love, John." He sealed the letter in an envelope, wrote Betty's address and placed it in his desk drawer. Not the outbox. The drawer, where it would only be found if he didn't come back. The clock read 21:45 hours. 9 hours until the test. 9 hours to sleep, except he knew he wouldn't. He'd lie in his bunk staring at the ceiling, running the geometry in his head, checking angles and speeds and timing, searching for the flaw that would kill them all. The telephone rang. "Thach. Commander, this is operations. We just received another combat report from Lexington. VF-2 engaged enemy fighters near Rabaul at 1800 hours local time. 3 Wildcats down, no survivors." Thach closed his eyes. 49. "Thank you, operations." He hung up and walked to the wall map. 3 more blue pins to remove. He pulled them out one by one and set them in a small wooden box on the shelf. 49 pins. 49 lives. 49 sons, brothers, husbands, fathers. Tomorrow he would take 4 more lives into his hands, O'Hare, Bassett, Lovelace, and his own, and test a theory born from 2 matchsticks and desperation. If he was wrong, the box would need more pins. If he was right, maybe, just maybe, he could stop filling it. He turned off the office light and walked out into the California night. The ocean wind carried salt and fog and the distant sound of waves breaking against the shore. Somewhere out there, beyond the horizon, beyond the darkness, pilots were dying, following orders, following training, following doctrine. Tomorrow, that was going to change. The alarm clock read 0445 when Thach gave up pretending to sleep. He'd been lying in his bunk for 6 hours, staring at the metal springs of the bed above him, running calculations in his head. Airspeed, closure rate, angle of crossing, margin of error. Every number had to be perfect, or 4 men would die before breakfast. He dressed in silence. The barracks held 20 bunks, but only 8 were occupied. The rest belonged to pilots who'd shipped out, or pilots who'd never come back. In the Navy, empty bunks filled faster than you could change the sheets. Outside, the pre-dawn air bit cold. February in San Diego meant 50 degrees and fog rolling in thick from the Pacific. Thach walked across the tarmac toward the flight line, his boots echoing against concrete that nobody else was walking on yet. Above him, stars still fought through the overcast. In 2 hours, he'd either validate a theory or validate everyone who thought he'd lost his mind. The ready room door swung open before he reached it. O'Hare stood there already in his flight suit, holding 2 cups of coffee. "Figured you'd be early, sir." Thach took the coffee. "Couldn't sleep." "Nope. Wrote 3 letters to my mother. Tore up 2 of them." "What did the third one say?" "That I'm flying with a commander who plays with matches and might be crazy, but at least he's trying something." O'Hare sipped his coffee. "Didn't mention the part where we might die testing it." "Probably wise." They stood together in the dark, drinking bad Navy coffee and not talking about the fact that in 90 minutes they'd attempt a maneuver that violated every principle of aerial combat. The silence felt comfortable. Thach had learned that combat pilots divided into 2 types: those who talked constantly before a mission to quiet their nerves, and those who went quiet to preserve their nerve. O'Hare was the second type. The door opened again. Bassett and Lovelace walked in together, both looking like they'd slept as poorly as Thach had. Lovelace spoke first. "Sir, I spent 4 hours last night working the math. Assuming we cross at a 90-degree angle at combat cruise speed, we'll have approximately 1.2 seconds between visual acquisition and crossing the other aircraft's flight path. Human reaction time averages 0.7 seconds. That leaves 0.5 seconds margin for error." "Half a second to not die," Bassett said. "Great." "Half a second more than Peterson had," Thach replied. "Suit up. Briefing in 5 minutes." The 4 men changed into flight gear without ceremony. Heavy leather jackets, cloth helmets, goggles, life vests that wouldn't save you if you went down in the Pacific but made the brass feel better about sending you out there. Thach strapped on his .38 revolver regulation sidearm that would be completely useless against a Zero, but might keep you alive if you got shot down and captured. Might. Probably not. Probably. At 0520 hours, they gathered around the blackboard. Thach drew the pattern again, slower this time, explaining every angle. "We fly in 2 elements. O'Hare, you're with me. Bassett, you're with Lovelace. We'll start in standard combat spread formation, 1,000 feet separation. On my mark, O'Hare and I will simulate being pursued by enemy fighters. We'll turn toward Bassett and Lovelace's element. They turn toward us. We cross at high speed." "How high?" Bassett asked. 250 knots, maybe 260. "Jesus Christ." "If you have a better idea, Ensign, now's the time." Bassett shook his head. Thach continued. "After the first cross, we reverse and do it again from the opposite direction. We keep weaving, keep crossing until either we make it work or we figure out why it doesn't." Questions? O'Hare raised his hand. "Sir, what's our abort criteria? At what point do we call it off? When someone dies or when we run out of fuel, whichever comes first." Nobody laughed. It wasn't a joke. Gentlemen, listen to me. Thach set down the chalk and looked at each man individually. What we're doing today is dangerous. But you know what's more dangerous? Flying the way we've been flying. 49 pilots are dead because they followed doctrine. We're going to write new doctrine starting at sunrise. You with me? Yes, sir, they answered in unison. The words came automatic trained response, but Thach heard something else underneath. Not quite belief, not quite doubt, something in between. Fear mixed with desperate hope. They walked out to the flight line at 0545. 4 Grumman F4F Wildcats sat waiting pre-flighted and fueled. Ground crews had been working since 0400 to get them ready. Chief Mechanic Wilson approached Thach, wiping grease from his hands. Birds are ready, Commander. Full fuel, full ammo. I loaded tracers in every 5th round like you requested. Good. I want to see exactly where we're shooting. Wilson hesitated. Sir, can I ask what kind of exercise you're running that needs live ammunition? The kind that might get me court-martialed, Chief. Best you don't know the details. Understood, sir. But for the record, whatever you're doing, the boys are talking. They think you might actually have figured something out. Let's hope they're right. Thach climbed into the cockpit of the lead Wildcat. The familiar ritual calmed his nerves. Adjust the seat, check the stick travel, test the rudder pedals, fuel mixture rich, throttle cracked, magnetos on. The Pratt & Whitney radial engine coughed, caught, roared to life. 14 cylinders firing in sequence, 1,200 horses straining against the brakes. Through the canopy, he watched O'Hare, Bassett, and Lovelace start their engines. 4 Wildcats, 4 pilots, 4 lives betting on 2 crossed matchsticks. The radio crackled. Tower to Thach. You're cleared for takeoff. Winds are calm. Ceiling 3,000 feet. 1,000 him. Good hunting. Thach to tower. Roger. Departing to the southwest for training exercise. Expected return time, 0730. He didn't mention they weren't supposed to be flying at all. Didn't mention he'd filed this as a routine proficiency flight. Didn't mention that if this went wrong, some admiral was going to have his head on a plate. At 0600 hours exactly, Thach released the brakes and pushed the throttle forward. The Wildcat accelerated down the runway tail, coming up airspeed building. 70 knots, 80, 90. At 100 knots, he pulled back gently and the aircraft lifted free, wheels up, climbing turn to the left. Behind him, 3 more Wildcats followed into the gray morning sky. They leveled at 2,000 feet, 15 miles offshore. Below them, the Pacific stretched dark and empty. No ships, no witnesses. Just 4 Navy fighters about to attempt something that might revolutionize air combat or might end with 4 bodies floating in the sea. Thach keyed the radio. Okay, gentlemen, form up. O'Hare on my right wing, Bassett and Lovelace 1,000 feet to our left. The aircraft moved into position. Thach could see O'Hare's Wildcat clearly, maybe 50 feet away. Further left, Bassett and Lovelace maintained their spacing. Perfect formation. By the book. Everything exactly as they'd been taught at Pensacola. Now came the part where they threw the book away. Here's how we start. O'Hare and I will break right, simulate being attacked from behind. Bassett, Lovelace, you break left toward us. We pass each other head on. Then we reverse and do it again. Keep your eyes open. Keep your heads moving. And for God's sake, don't hit each other. Roger that, 3 voices replied. Thach took a breath. This was it. The moment of truth. Either the geometry worked, or they'd just created the most expensive way to commit suicide the Navy had ever funded. Execute on my mark. 3, 2, 1. Brake. Thach threw the stick right and pushed the throttle to the firewall. The Wildcat rolled into a steep turn, G-forces pressing him into the seat. Through the canopy, he saw Bassett and Lovelace's Element turning hard left, closing fast. 2 aircraft approaching head-on at a combined speed of nearly 500 knots. Time compressed. His brain shifted into that strange state where everything moved slow and fast simultaneously. He could see individual rivets on Bassett's aircraft. Could see the propeller blades blurring into a disc. Could see exactly where they were going to cross. 200 yards. 100. 50. They flashed past each other with maybe 30 feet of separation. The turbulence from Bassett's prop wash jolted Thach's aircraft. He fought the controls, kept it steady. Jesus! O'Hare's voice crackled over the radio. That was close. Again, Thach ordered. Reverse and cross again. He pulled the stick left rolled inverted for a split second, then rolled back upright, heading the opposite direction. Bassett and Lovelace had done the same. Two elements converging again from opposite directions. This time, Thach focused not on avoiding collision, but on imagining an enemy fighter between them. If a Zero had been chasing him, it would have been right there, right in the crossing point, forced to choose between taking fire from Lovelace or breaking off pursuit. They crossed again. Closer this time, maybe 20 feet. Close enough that Thach could see Lovelace's face through the canopy eyes, wide jaw set. It works, Bassett said over the radio. Holy hell, sir, it actually works. Keep going, Thach commanded. I want 10 more crosses. We need to make this automatic muscle memory. If you have to think about it in combat, you're already dead. For the next 20 minutes, they wove back and forth across the sky. Break right, cross reverse. Break left, cross reverse. Each pass brought them closer together as confidence built. Each pass refined the timing, the angles, the spacing. What started as terrifying became mechanical. What felt impossible became routine. On the 15th crossing, Thach keyed the radio. Bassett, simulate that you're being pursued. Act like there's a Zero on your tail. Lovelace, maintain position. O'Hare and I will engage. Roger, Bassett replied. He broke hard right, pushing his Wildcat into a climbing turn. Standard evasive maneuver against a pursuing fighter. Thach and O'Hare turned to intercept. As they closed, Thach imagined the geometry from the enemy pilot's perspective. You're chasing Bassett. He's turning hard trying to escape. You're faster, more maneuverable. You're gaining. You've almost got gun solution. Then suddenly 2 more Wildcats appear from your left head-on guns blazing. What do? Simulated guns, Thach called. He squeezed the trigger. Tracers arced through the sky, bright red streaks that would have passed directly through the space where an enemy fighter would have been. Lovelace crossed from the opposite direction simultaneously, his tracers converging on the same point. An imaginary Zero caught between them would have had nowhere to go. Break, 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 Thach heard himself shouting like he was talking to an enemy pilot who wasn't there. The excitement in his voice surprised him. They reversed and did it again, and again. Each time the pattern grew tighter, more lethal. Each time the hypothetical enemy had less room to maneuver. After 40 minutes, Thach called a pause. Form up, let's talk. The 4 Wildcats came together in loose formation at 3,000 feet. Dawn had broken fully now. Below them, the Pacific had changed from black to gray to blue. Above, the sky brightened toward morning. Thach's hands shook slightly on the stick. Not from fear anymore. From adrenaline, from vindication, from the sudden crushing weight of understanding that this actually worked, and he hadn't just imagined it. O'Hare, your assessment. Sir, that was the most insane thing I've ever done. Also the most brilliant. If we tried to turn with a Zero, we'd be dead. But crossing like that, the enemy pilot has to react. Has to choose. Either way, he loses his advantage. Bassett. Agree with O'Hare, sir. The key is the timing. We have to cross at exactly the right moment. Too early, the enemy slips through. Too late, he gets a shot off. But if we nail the timing... He paused. Sir, this could change everything. Lovelace, you've been quiet. Problems. Lovelace took a moment to answer. Sir, I keep thinking about what happens when the Japanese figure out what we're doing, because they will. They're not stupid. What happens when they adapt? Then we adapt again, Thach said. But right now, they think they own the sky. They think we're easy targets. That arrogance is our advantage. He checked his fuel gauge. They'd burned through half their tanks. Time to head back. Gentlemen, one more thing before we return to base. We're going to practice this at combat speed with combat separation. I want to see if we can maintain the pattern when we're tired, when we're low on fuel, when conditions aren't perfect, because that's when we'll need it most. For the next 30 minutes, they pushed harder. Tighter crosses, faster speeds. Simulated battle damage forcing them to adjust on the fly. Thach took them through scenarios. What if one element loses an aircraft? What if you're outnumbered 3-1? What if you're attacking bombers and fighters? Jump you. Every scenario had an answer. Every problem had a solution rooted in the same principle. Never fight alone, always cross, always protect your wingman. At 0722 hours, Thach led them back toward North Island. His fuel gauge read 1/4 tank. His arms ached from fighting the controls for 90 minutes. His flight suit was soaked with sweat despite the cold, but his mind raced with possibilities. They landed in sequence 8 minutes apart. Thach touched down last at 0738, taxied to the parking area, and shut down the engine. The sudden silence felt unnatural after 90 minutes of engine roar. Chief Wilson approached as Thach climbed out of the cockpit. "How'd it go, sir?" "Chief, I need you to ready these aircraft for another flight this afternoon, and I need to see the Admiral, now." "Sir, the Admiral didn't authorize this morning's flight, did he?" "No, he did not." "Then maybe you should clean up first. You look like you've been through a dogfight." Thach glanced down. His hands were still shaking. His face dripped sweat. His flight suit was wrinkled and stained. Wilson was right. He looked like hell. "Chief, if I clean up first, I'll lose my nerve. I need to walk into his office right now while I still believe this is going to work." O'Hare, Bassett, and Lovelace gathered around them. All 4 pilots looked exhausted and exhilarated in equal measure. "So what do we tell the Admiral?" O'Hare asked. "The truth," Thach said. "That we just spent 90 minutes breaking every rule in the tactical manual, and we survived. That we tested a maneuver that could keep our pilots alive. That we need immediate authorization to train the entire squadron. And if he says no," Bassett asked, "then I'll keep training you in secret until he figures it out, or I get court-martialed, whichever comes first." They walked together toward the base headquarters building. The morning sun had burned off the fog. Ground crews were servicing aircraft. Pilots were heading to breakfast. Everything looked normal, peaceful routine. But Thach knew something had changed. They'd crossed a threshold up there over the Pacific. They'd proven that geometry and trust could defeat superior performance. They'd found a way to turn 4 slow, heavy Wildcats into something dangerous. The question now was whether the Navy would let them use it. Admiral William Halsey's office occupied the corner of the headquarters building with windows overlooking the flight line. His secretary, a chief petty officer named Patterson, looked up as Thach approached. "Commander Thach, the Admiral didn't have you on his schedule this morning." "I need 5 minutes, Chief. It's urgent." Patterson studied Thach's disheveled appearance, then picked up the phone. "Sir, Commander Thach is here. Says it's urgent." A pause. "Yes, sir." He hung up. "Go ahead in. But fair warning, he's in a mood." Thach knocked once and entered without waiting for acknowledgement. Halsey sat behind his desk, reading a stack of casualty reports. He looked up, and his eyes went immediately to Thach's sweat-stained flight suit. "Commander, you look like you've been flying." "Yes, sir. Training exercise this morning. Unauthorized." Halsey set down the paper slowly. "You conducted an unauthorized training flight." "Yes, sir. And I need to talk to you about it before you decide to have me court-martialed." For a long moment, Halsey said nothing. Then he leaned back in his chair. "This better be good, John. I've got 12 more casualty reports to read before lunch. Make it quick." Thach stepped forward. "Sir, we lost 3 more pilots yesterday. That makes 49 since Pearl Harbor. All of them died trying to turn with zeros. I think I figured out how to stop that." "Go on." 2 aircraft elements flying a crossing pattern. We protect each other by converging on any enemy that pursues, forces them to break off or take fire. I tested it this morning with 3 pilots. It works." Halsey's expression didn't change. "You tested a new tactical doctrine without authorization." "Yes, sir." "You risked 4 aircraft and 4 pilots on an untried maneuver." "Yes, sir." "And you're standing here telling me this instead of filing a report through proper channels because proper channels take weeks, sir. And we don't have weeks. We're losing pilots every day. If this works, and I believe it does, we need to start training immediately." Halsey stood and walked to the window. He stared out at the flight line where ground crews worked on parked Wildcats. When he spoke, his voice was quiet. "John, I've known you for 8 years. You're careful. Methodical. You don't take unnecessary risks. So when you walk into my office looking like you just survived a bar fight and tell me you've invented a new way to fight, I'm inclined to listen. He turned from the window. But you understand what you're asking. You want to throw out tactical doctrine that's been developed over 20 years. You want to retrain every fighter pilot in the Pacific on a maneuver you tested once. And you want to do it based on what a hunch, not a hunch, sir, math, geometry, and desperation. Desperation. I can't keep sending telegrams to Mother's Admiral. I can't keep telling them their sons died following orders when the orders are wrong. Halsey walked back to his desk and picked up one of the casualty reports. Ensign Michael Peterson, age 22, shot down over Wake Island attempting standard pursuit maneuver against enemy fighter, killed in action. He set it down. That's one of the 12 I'm reading today. Want to hear the other 11? No, sir. Neither do I. But I read them anyway because those boys deserve to have someone know how they died. He looked directly at Thach. Show me. Sir. Show me this maneuver. Get your pilots back in the air. I'll watch from the tower. You've got one demonstration to convince me this isn't suicide with extra steps. Thach felt his heart rate spike. Yes, sir. When? Now, Commander. Right now. Because if this works, we're going to teach it to every pilot in the Pacific Fleet. And if it doesn't work, you're going to spend the rest of the war behind a desk pushing papers and regretting the day you decided to play with matchsticks. 30 minutes later, Thach stood on the control tower observation deck, watching Admiral Halsey scan the sky through binoculars. Below them, 4 Wildcats taxied into position. O'Hare Bassett Lovelace and Thach's backup pilot, Lieutenant James Flatley, who'd been pulled from the ready room with 0 briefing and 10 minutes to understand what they were about to attempt. Flatley's never done this before, Halsey said without lowering the binoculars. No, sir, but he's a fast learner, and this only works if we can teach it quickly. Or if he dies quickly and proves your theory is garbage. Thach said nothing. Halsey was testing him, pushing to see if he'd break under pressure. Standard flag officer tactic. Thach had seen it before. The radio crackled. Tower, this is O'Hare. Flight of 4 ready for departure. Halsey picked up the handset. O'Hare, this is Admiral Halsey. Your commander has convinced me to watch him either revolutionize naval aviation or kill 4 pilots in spectacular fashion. Don't disappoint me. Brief silence. Then O'Hare's voice came back steady. No pressure, sir. Cleared for takeoff. Show me something worth court-martialing your CO over. The 4 Wildcats accelerated down the runway in sequence, lifting into the morning sky. Thach tracked them visually as they climbed to 3,000 feet and formed up in 2 elements. His stomach twisted. This wasn't practice anymore. This was performance. And Admiral Halsey didn't tolerate failure. Chief Patterson appeared on the observation deck, carrying a pot of coffee and 2 cups. He poured without asking and handed one to Halsey. Chief, how long have you been watching pilots train? Halsey asked. 22 years, sir. Ever seen anything like what we're about to watch? No, sir. But I've seen a lot of pilots die doing the same thing over and over, expecting different results. Maybe it's time we tried something different. Halsey grunted and raised his binoculars again. Commander Thach, you've got 10 minutes. Impress me. Thach keyed the radio. O'Hare, execute standard weave pattern. Make it clean. Roger. Executing. Through binoculars, Thach watched the 4 aircraft split into 2 elements separated by 1,000 feet. O'Hare and Flatley broke right. Bassett and Lovelace broke left. The elements converged head-on at closing speed that made Thach's chest tighten, even though he knew the geometry worked. They crossed with maybe 40 feet separation. Clean, precise. Again, Thach ordered. They reversed and crossed from the opposite direction. Then again, then again. Each crossing looked like a near collision to anyone who didn't understand the math. Each crossing demonstrated perfect timing, perfect trust. After the 5th crossing, Halsey lowered his binoculars. Okay, they can fly in circles without hitting each other. Now show me how this helps against a 0. Thach keyed the radio. O'Hare, aggressive scenario. Flatley, you're the 0. 0. Get on Bassett's tail and stay there. Everyone else defend. Roger that, Flatley replied. Going hot. Flatley broke formation and dove toward Bassett's element, simulating an attacking enemy fighter. He closed fast, positioning himself directly behind Bassett at 6 o'clock. Perfect firing position. Bassett immediately turned hard toward Lovelace's position. Lovelace turned toward Bassett. They crossed, and suddenly Flatley found himself facing Lovelace head-on. He broke left to avoid collision. "Guns, guns, guns," Lovelace called over the radio. "Simulated kill on the 0. But Flatley didn't give up. He reversed hard, trying to reacquire Bassett. O'Hare anticipated it and crossed from above, forcing Flatley to break again. "Guns, guns, guns," O'Hare called. "Second simulated kill." For 3 minutes, Flatley attacked from every angle, using every tactic in the book. High side approach, low side approach, climbing attack, diving attack. Every time the weave pattern forced him to break off or accept head-on fire. Every time he ended up defensive instead of offensive. Finally, Flatley called out, "Okay, I'm dead 6 times over. This is impossible. I can't stay on anyone's tail for more than 3 seconds." Halsey set down his binoculars and turned to Thach. "Call them back." "Sir, we can demonstrate more scenarios." "Call them back, Commander. I've seen enough." Thach's stomach dropped. Enough meant either success or disaster, and Halsey's expression gave nothing away. All aircraft returned to base. The 4 Wildcats formed up and headed back toward North Island. Thach watched them approach landing gear, extending, preparing to touch down. His career hung in the balance. Either Halsey would authorize training, or Thach would spend the rest of the war filing reports in some basement office in Washington. After the last aircraft landed, Halsey turned to face him. "Commander, that was the most reckless, dangerous, completely insane tactical maneuver I've ever seen." Thach's heart sank. "It's also brilliant. I want every pilot in VF3 trained on this by the end of the week. After that, we train VF2, VF6, and every other squadron in the Pacific. You've got 72 hours to develop a training syllabus." Halsey extended his hand. "Congratulations. You just changed the way we fight this war." Thach shook his hand, feeling like he might collapse from relief. "Thank you, sir. Don't thank me yet. You've got to actually teach this to 100 pilots who think they already know how to fly. Most of them won't believe it until they see it. Some of them won't believe it even after they see it. You're going to face resistance." "I can handle resistance, sir." "Good. Because we're out of time and out of pilots. If this doesn't work in actual combat, a lot of men are going to die, and it'll be on both our heads." By 1400 hours that afternoon, word had spread through the entire air station. Commander Thach had invented something crazy, something that might work. Pilots gathered in the ready room, standing room, only everyone wanting to hear it firsthand. Thach stood at the front with O'Hare, Bassett, and Lovelace beside him. Behind them, the blackboard showed the crossing pattern drawn in white chalk. "Gentlemen, we're going to cover a lot of ground quickly, so pay attention. What I'm about to teach you violates most of what you learned at Pensacola. You're going to think it's suicide. Your instincts will tell you it's wrong, but 49 dead pilots prove our current tactics don't work, so we're trying something new." He pointed to the diagram. "We call it the Thach Weave, 2 aircraft elements flying mutual support. When one gets pursued, both aircraft turn toward each other and cross paths at high speed. The pursuing enemy is forced to break off or take fire. You keep weaving, keep crossing until the enemy gives up or dies." A pilot in the back row raised his hand. "Sir, what if the 0 doesn't break off? What if he just shoots through the cross?" "Then his wingman shoots him. This only works if the enemy is stupid or alone. Most 0 pilots hunt in pairs, but they don't use mutual support like this. They rely on individual skill and aircraft performance. We're going to use teamwork to beat their performance advantage." Another hand went up. "Sir, this requires perfect timing. What if we're off by even a second?" "Then you collide and die," Thach said bluntly. "That's why we train until the timing becomes automatic. That's why you fly with the same wingman every mission until you know exactly how he thinks. This isn't a maneuver you can improvise. This is a survival skill you drill until you can do it asleep." Lieutenant Commander Flatley spoke up from the side. I played the zero in this morning's demonstration. I'm telling you right now, it's impossible to stay offensive when they're running this pattern. Every time I tried to shoot, someone's guns pointed at my face. Every time I broke off, I lost position. After 3 minutes, I was defensive and they were hunting me. But you're American, someone called out. You were playing by American rules. What if the Japanese don't break off? What if their culture makes them more willing to die? Thach had anticipated this question. Then they die, and we don't. This pattern works because of physics, not culture. A zero can't survive head-on cannon fire any better than we can. The pilot has to choose break off or die. Culture doesn't change that math. He let that sink in, then continued. Here's the training schedule. Starting tomorrow at 0600, we run continuous 2-hour flights, 4 aircraft at a time. You'll practice the weave pattern until you can do it in your sleep. We'll simulate every scenario: outnumbered, damaged aircraft, low fuel, bad weather. By Friday, every pilot in this squadron will be qualified. Questions. A dozen hands shot up. Thach pointed to Ensign Roberts, a quiet kid from Texas, who rarely spoke in briefings. Sir, when do we get to test this against actual zeros? Soon. Admiral Halsey is pushing for authorization to deploy VF-3 forward to Pearl Harbor within 2 weeks. Once we're in theater, we'll get our chance. Roberts's hand stayed up. Sir, I mean no disrespect, but 50 pilots have died fighting zeros in the past 2 months. What makes you think this will be any different? Thach walked down the center aisle until he stood directly in front of Roberts. He spoke quietly, but everyone in the room heard. Ensign, those 50 pilots died alone. They followed doctrine that said every man fights his own fight. This pattern means nobody fights alone. Ever. Your wingman protects you. You protect him. That's the difference. He turned to address the whole room. The Japanese train their pilots to be individual masters. They practice dogfighting one-on-one. They believe the superior pilot will always win. We're going to prove them wrong. We're going to show them that 2 average pilots working together can beat the best individual pilot in the world. The room went quiet. Thach could see the calculation happening behind their eyes. Hope mixed with skepticism. Desire to believe mixed with fear of disappointment. O'Hare stood up. I flew this pattern twice today. First time I thought the commander had lost his mind. Second time I understood. This changes everything. The zero isn't invincible anymore. We have an answer. All we have to do is trust each other and trust the pattern. Bassett stood next. I've been flying for 6 years. I thought I knew every defensive maneuver there was. This morning, Commander Thach showed me I was wrong. And you know what? I'm grateful. Because if I'd gone into combat against zeros using old tactics, I'd be dead. Now I've got a chance. One by one, other pilots stood. Not speaking, just standing. A silent acknowledgement, a willingness to try. By the time the briefing ended at 1600 hours, every pilot in VF-3 had volunteered for immediate training. Thach divided them into 4 aircraft sections and scheduled round-the-clock practice flights. The air station's operations officer complained about fuel consumption. Thach told him to complain to Admiral Halsey. The maintenance chief worried about engine wear. Thach told him to prep backup aircraft. Nothing was going to stop this training. That evening, Thach sat in his office writing the formal tactical doctrine. The words came slowly. How do you codify instinct? How do you write a manual for something that had to be felt rather than memorized? A knock on the door interrupted him. Lieutenant Commander Jimmy Flatley walked in carrying 2 sandwiches and a thermos of coffee. Figured you hadn't eaten, sir. You figured right. Thach took the sandwich gratefully. Thanks, Jimmy. Flatley sat across from him. Can I speak freely, sir? Always. This morning, when you told me I was flying the zero, I thought you were testing me, seeing if I could figure out the pattern on my own. It wasn't until I was up there trying everything I knew that I realized there is no counter to this pattern. Not for a single fighter. The only way to beat it is to outnumber them or have your own mutual support. That's the idea, Thach said. But here's what worries me. The Japanese aren't stupid. Once they see this pattern, once they understand how it works, they'll adapt. They'll develop their own version. Then we're back to square one. Maybe, but right now they think they own the sky. That arrogance is our window. We hit them hard, hit them fast, and kill as many as we can before they adapt. Thach set down his sandwich. Jimmy, this isn't a permanent solution. This is buying time. Time for better aircraft. Time for more pilots. Time for America's industrial base to catch up. We don't have to win every fight. We just have to stop losing every fight. Flatley nodded slowly. How many pilots do you think this will save? I don't know. 10, 100. If we're lucky, maybe more. Thach leaned back. But even if it saves one pilot, it's worth it. Because that one pilot might be the guy who figures out the next innovation, or the guy who trains the next generation, or just a kid from Iowa who deserves to go home to his mother. Bassett's from Iowa. I know. They sat in comfortable silence, eating sandwiches and drinking bad coffee. Outside, the sun set over the Pacific, painting the sky orange and red. Tomorrow they'd start training in earnest. Tomorrow, pilots would practice a maneuver that might save their lives or might kill them in training. Tomorrow, everything would change. But tonight, for just a moment, Thach let himself feel something close to hope. The training began at dawn on February 12, 1942. 4 Wildcats launched at 0600, 4 more at 0630, 4 more at 0700. Continuous cycles, each flight lasting 2 hours, each crew returning exhausted and exhilarated. By the end of the first day, 2 near collisions had occurred. No damage, but close enough that Thach grounded both pilots until they could demonstrate perfect timing on the ground using models. By the end of the second day, 12 pilots were qualified. The word qualified meant they could execute the weave pattern without thinking, react automatically, when threatened trust their wingman completely. By the end of the third day, 24 pilots were qualified and Admiral Halsey showed up personally to watch the afternoon training session. Thach stood beside him on the observation deck as 3 sections of 4 aircraft each practiced the pattern simultaneously. 12 Wildcats weaving through the sky in coordinated chaos that looked random but followed precise geometry. How many pilots can execute this now? Halsey asked. 24 qualified, another 16 in training. By Friday, the entire squadron. Losses? None, sir. 3 minor incidents. 1 propeller strike on landing unrelated to the weave training. No casualties. Halsey watched through binoculars for a long moment. Commander, I'm authorizing deployment. VF-3 ships out to Pearl Harbor on February 20th. 1 week from today, you'll be assigned to Carrier Lexington. Captain Frederick Sherman, commanding. Thach's chest tightened. 1 week. 7 days to finish training and prepare his pilots for actual combat. Understood, sir. We'll be ready. You better be, because the Japanese are planning something big. We don't know what yet, but intelligence suggests major operations in the next month. Your pilots are going to face the real thing soon. That evening, Thach called the entire squadron together one final time before deployment. 42 pilots filled the ready room. 42 men who'd been strangers 8 weeks ago and were now brothers. 42 lives Thach was responsible for keeping alive. Gentlemen, we ship out in 7 days. Between now and then, we train harder than we've ever trained. We perfect this pattern until we can fly it blind. Because once we're in combat, there are no second chances. The Japanese won't give us time to think. They won't let us make mistakes. So we make our mistakes here where they don't cost lives. He paused, looking at each face. O'Hare in the front row, confident and calm. Bassett beside him, nervous energy barely contained. Lovelace in the back, arms crossed, expression serious. Flatley leaning against the wall, studying everyone else. 42 individuals who had to function as one coordinated unit. I know what you're thinking, Thach continued. You're thinking about the 50 pilots who died before we figured this out. You're wondering if this pattern will actually work in combat, or if it's just theory that falls apart when bullets fly. You're scared. No one disagreed. Good. Fear keeps you sharp. Fear keeps you alive. But don't let fear paralyze you, because you've got something those 50 pilots didn't have. You've got a pattern that works. You've got wingmen you can trust. And you've got each other. He walked to the blackboard and picked up the 2 matchsticks he'd been carrying in his pocket for 8 days. He held them up, crossed them so everyone could see. My wife sent me these in a care package. I crossed them one night because I was desperate and out of ideas. And somehow, those two pieces of wood showed me how to save lives. That's all this pattern is, two aircraft protecting each other, crossing paths, staying together. Simple, elegant, deadly. He set the matchsticks on the table at the front of the room. When we get into combat, some of you are going to panic. Some of you are going to forget your training. Some of you are going to want to break off and fight alone because that's what feels natural. Don't. Trust the pattern. Trust your wingman. Trust that geometry beats performance. Do that, and you'll come home. All of you. Roberts raised his hand. Sir, what if we don't all come home? What if some of us die anyway? Thach met his eyes. Then we make sure they don't die alone, and we make sure their death means something. Every zero we shoot down is one less threat to the next pilot. Every mission we survive is proof that this pattern works. Every one of you who comes home gets to teach the next generation how to fight and survive. The room sat silent. Outside, the Pacific wind rattled the windows. Somewhere out there beyond the horizon, Japanese fighters waited. They didn't know about the Thach Weave yet. Didn't know that everything was about to change, but they'd learn soon enough. Thach dismissed the briefing at 2100 hours. The pilots filed out slowly, talking in small groups, processing what came next. O'Hare lingered, waiting until the room emptied. Sir, can I ask you something personal? Go ahead, Butch. When you first crossed those matchsticks, did you know it would work? Or were you just hoping? Thach considered lying, then decided O'Hare deserved the truth. I was hoping. That's all I had, hope and desperation. I watched 50 pilots die, and I knew if I didn't try something different, it would be 60, then 70, then 100. So I crossed two matchsticks and prayed I saw something real. And now I know it works. I've seen it work. I've flown it myself. But Butch, here's what keeps me up at night. I'm betting all your lives that I'm right. 42 pilots trusting that I haven't missed something, that the geometry holds up in combat, that the Japanese don't have some counter I haven't thought of. That's a heavy weight. O'Hare nodded. Sir, every pilot in this squadron knows the risk. We also know you gave us a chance we didn't have before. That's enough. After O'Hare left, Thach returned to his office. He pulled out the letter he'd written to Betty before the first test flight, the one he'd put in his desk drawer to be found only if he died. He tore it up. That version of events didn't happen. He survived. They all survived. Now he wrote a different letter. Betty, the matchsticks you sent saved lives. I know that sounds insane, but it's true. I used them to figure out a tactical pattern that might change how we fight this war. We're deploying to Pearl Harbor in 7 days, and I'll be taking 42 pilots into combat using a technique that didn't exist 2 weeks ago. I'm terrified and excited in equal measure. Terrified because I might be wrong and good men will die. Excited because I hope we've found an answer to a problem that's been killing our pilots since December. If something happens to me, know that I died trying to do the right thing. Tell Sarah her daddy loved her, and hold on to those matchsticks. Someday they might end up in a museum, a reminder that the smallest things can change everything. I love you. John. He sealed the letter and addressed it. This one he'd mail. This one she'd read whether he lived or died, because she deserved to know that something she sent casually without thinking had mattered. The clock read 2300 hours. Thach turned off the office light and walked out into the California night. Above him, stars fought through scattered clouds. In 7 days, he'd be looking at different stars from the deck of a carrier in the Pacific. In 7 days, everything would be real. But tonight, those two matchsticks sat on his desk, crossed in an X pattern, casting tiny shadows that looked like wings. 7 days passed in a blur of flight training equipment checks and sleepless nights. On February 20th, 1942, VF-3 boarded the USS Enterprise at Pearl Harbor. The carrier would transport them to their operational assignment aboard USS Lexington, which was already deployed northwest of New Caledonia. Thach stood on deck watching Oahu disappear behind them, knowing that the next time his pilots saw land, they might be fighting for their lives above it. The Pacific crossing took 4 days. Thach used every hour to drill his pilots on the weave pattern using models, diagrams, and endless tactical discussions. In the cramped ready room, pilots practiced hand signals, memorized communication protocols, and learned to anticipate their wingman's movements before they happened. On the third day out, O'Hare approached Thach during evening chow. The mess hall smelled like institutional food and diesel fuel, the perpetual aroma of every warship afloat. "Sir, the men are getting anxious. We've trained hard, but none of us have actually tested this against real zeros. What if it's different in combat?" Thach set down his coffee cup. "It will be different. Training never captures the chaos of actual combat. But the geometry doesn't change. Physics doesn't care if you're scared or if someone's shooting at you. The pattern works because the math works. And if the Japanese pilots don't react the way we expect, then we adapt. Butch, listen to me. We're not trying to fight the perfect battle. We're trying to survive long enough to learn from our mistakes. First combat engagement will discover things we didn't anticipate. Second engagement will be smarter. Third engagement will start winning." O'Hare nodded slowly. "How many engagements do you think it'll take before we lose someone?" Thach had been dreading that question. "I don't know, but it'll be fewer losses than if we fought the old way. That's all I can promise." On February 24th, Enterprise rendezvoused with Lexington 200 miles northeast of New Caledonia. VF-3 transferred to their new carrier home via cod flight. Captain Frederick Sherman met Thach on the flight deck, a tall man with iron-gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. "Commander Thach, Admiral Halsey speaks highly of your new tactical innovation. My air group commander is skeptical. Convince him this isn't going to get my pilots killed." "I'd prefer to demonstrate rather than explain, sir." "You'll get your chance. Intelligence reports indicate Japanese forces are operating near Rabaul. We're steaming northwest to intercept. Expect combat operations within 48 hours. 48 hours. 2 days until theory became reality. That evening, Thach gathered his pilots in Lexington's ready room. The space felt different from the one at North Island, larger, more Spartan, with the constant vibration of the carrier's engines thrumming through the deck plates. Maps covered the bulkheads showing the Solomon Islands, New Guinea, the approaches to Rabaul. "Gentlemen, we're going into combat. Enemy forces are operating in our area. When we launch, we'll likely encounter Zero fighters. This is what we've been training for." He paused, letting that sink in. Some faces showed excitement, others showed fear, most showed both. "I need to know right now if anyone has doubts about the weave pattern. If you don't believe it'll work, if you can't commit fully, tell me now. I'll have you reassigned to Cap over the carrier. No judgment, no shame. But I need pilots who trust the pattern and trust their wingmen without hesitation." Silence. 42 pilots stared back at him. Nobody moved. Finally, Ensign Roberts spoke up. "Sir, I'm scared out of my mind. But I'm more scared of fighting alone. I trust the pattern." Heads nodded around the room. "All right then." Thach turned to the map. "Standard doctrine says we maintain Cap at 20,000 feet, but I'm requesting permission to take one division down to 15,000. Lower altitude means better visibility, better communication, and faster response time if bombers appear. It also means we're more likely to encounter enemy fighters first." "You're volunteering to be bait," O'Hare said. "I'm volunteering to test this pattern in actual combat before committing the entire squadron. 4 aircraft. If it works, we expand. If it doesn't..." He didn't finish. Flatley stood. "I'm in. I played the Zero in training. I want to see how real Zero pilots react." "I'm in," O'Hare said. "Me too," Bassett added. Thach looked at them, 3 men volunteering to risk their lives on a tactical theory developed from crossed matchsticks. "All right, we brief again at 0500 tomorrow. Get some rest. Tomorrow we find out if I'm a genius or a fool." Sleep didn't come easy that night. Thach lay in his bunk listening to the carrier's engines, the voices of sailors on watch, the endless ambient noise of a warship at sea. He thought about the 49 pilots who died before he figured out the weave. He thought about Betty and Sarah back in Pittsburgh. He thought about those 2 matchsticks still sitting on his desk at North Island. Tomorrow, everything changed. At 05:30 hours on February 26, 1942, the loudspeaker crackled throughout Lexington. All pilots man your aircraft. All pilots man your aircraft. This is not a drill. Thach was already dressed. He grabbed his flight gear and headed for the ready room where intelligence officers were updating the situation board. Red symbols marked enemy bomber formations spotted by patrol aircraft heading toward Lexington's task force. Estimated time to contact 90 minutes. Captain Sherman addressed the assembled pilots. Gentlemen, we have inbound enemy bombers with fighter escort. All squadrons will launch immediately. Dive bombers will attack the bomber formation. Fighters will engage the escort. Commander Thach, your division will take the high cap position. Sir, request permission to operate at 15,000 feet instead of 20,000. Sherman's eyes narrowed. That puts you below standard cap altitude. You'll be more vulnerable. It also puts us in position to intercept the escort before they reach the bombers. Sir, my division has trained specifically for this scenario. Let us do what we trained for. Sherman considered for 5 seconds that felt like 5 hours. Approved. But Commander, if this fails, sir, I won't be alive to face court-martial. Fair enough, launch when ready. 20 minutes later, Thach sat in his Wildcat as the catapult officer signaled launch positions. O'Hare was to his right, Flatley and Bassett behind them. 4 aircraft, 4 pilots, 1 untested tactical pattern. The catapult fired. The Wildcat accelerated from 0 to 90 knots in 2 seconds, the G-forces crushing Thach into his seat. Then he was airborne, climbing away from Lexington's deck into the gray morning sky. Division form on me, Thach ordered. The 3 other Wildcats slid into position. Perfect formation. Exactly as trained. They climbed to 15,000 feet and began their patrol pattern. Below them, Lexington steamed northeast at 25 knots, tiny and vulnerable on the vast Pacific. Above them, broken clouds scattered across blue sky. Perfect conditions for aerial combat. Thach scanned the horizon constantly, eyes moving in systematic sectors. High right, high left, check 6, forward repeat. The 0 could come from anywhere. At 0647 hours, O'Hare's voice cracked over the radio. Contacts 2 o'clock high, count 6 bogies descending. Thach spotted them immediately. 6 aircraft diving out of the sun. His heart rate spiked. This was it. All aircraft, those are 0s. Execute standard weave on my mark. Remember your training. Trust your wingman. The 6 Zeros split into 2 groups of 3 classic Japanese tactic. They'd engage from 2 directions simultaneously, force the Americans to split their attention. Here they come, Flatley said quietly. The first group of Zeros dove toward Thach and O'Hare. The second group angled toward Flatley and Bassett. Thach estimated closure rate at 400 knots, 10 seconds to engagement. Weave pattern, execute. Thach broke hard left toward O'Hare's position. O'Hare broke right toward Thach. They crossed with maybe 20 feet separation, the turbulence rattling both aircraft. Behind them, the lead 0 had been tracking Thach, lining up gun solution. Suddenly, O'Hare's Wildcat appeared head-on in his windscreen. The 0 pilot broke hard left to avoid collision. Guns, guns, guns. O'Hare's tracers chased the 0 as it rolled away. Thach reversed immediately, crossing back the other direction. The second 0 had followed O'Hare through the first cross and now found Thach coming at him head-on. The Japanese pilot fired. Thach saw the muzzle flashes from his cowl-mounted guns but broke off before getting good solution. They crossed again. And again. The weave pattern was working. Every time a 0 committed to pursuit, another Wildcat appeared threatening head-on attack. The Japanese pilots couldn't maintain offensive pressure. But then everything changed. The third 0 didn't break off. He came straight through the weave pattern, guns blazing, apparently willing to accept head-on fire to get a kill. His 20mm cannon shells walked across O'Hare's left wing, punching holes through aluminum. "I'm hit," O'Hare called. "Left aileron damaged, losing hydraulic pressure." Thach's mind raced. O'Hare couldn't maintain full maneuverability. The weave pattern required both aircraft to turn at equal rates. If O'Hare couldn't turn hard enough, no time to think. Only react. "Butch, shallow your turns. I'll compensate. Stay with me." They crossed again, but this time Thach turned harder, tighter, covering the angle O'Hare couldn't match. The geometry shifted, became asymmetric, but still functional. The 0 pursuing O'Hare still faced Thach coming head-on. Meanwhile, Flatley and Bassett fought their own battle 200 yards away. Thach caught glimpses between crosses, two Wildcats weaving perfectly 3 zeros, unable to maintain pursuit. Flatley's voice came over the radio, excited and terrified simultaneously. "It's working! They can't stay on us!" But the Japanese weren't giving up. They'd split into 3 groups now, attacking from 3 different directions, trying to overwhelm the weave pattern through sheer numbers. Thach felt the tactical situation deteriorating. 4 Wildcats against 6 zeros. O'Hare damaged fuel burning fast. Then salvation appeared from above. "Thach, this is Lexington Cap Leader. We're diving to assist. Hold them another 30 seconds. 6 more Wildcats plunged down from 20,000 feet, guns firing. The Zeros, suddenly outnumbered and caught in crossfire, broke off and dove away toward the clouds. The engagement had lasted 4 minutes. It felt like 4 hours. "All aircraft damage report," Thach ordered. "O'Hare left aileron damaged but controllable. Can make it back to the boat." Flatley, no damage. Bassett, no damage. Thach checked his own aircraft. Fuel at 60%. No battle damage. Heart pounding so hard he could hear it over the engine noise. "Division form on me. We're heading home." They landed aboard Lexington at 07 on 12 hours. Thach's legs shook as he climbed out of the cockpit. Ground crews swarmed O'Hare's aircraft, assessing the damage. 7 holes in the left wing hydraulic lines, severed aileron control rod nearly shot through. Captain Sherman met them on the flight deck. "Commander, I watched that engagement from the bridge through binoculars. I've never seen anything like it. You took on 6 zeros and survived. That shouldn't be possible." "It shouldn't be, sir. But the weave pattern changes the math. We didn't win that fight, we survived it. That's enough." "It's more than enough." Sherman extended his hand. "You've proven your concept. I'm authorizing full squadron training on the Thach Weave, effective immediately. Every fighter pilot on this carrier will learn your pattern." In the ready room afterward, the 4 pilots collapsed into chairs. Nobody spoke for a long moment. Finally, O'Hare broke the silence. "Sir, when that zero came straight through instead of breaking off, I thought we were done. I thought the pattern failed." "It didn't fail," Thach said. "We adapted. That's the key. The pattern gives us structure, but we have to stay flexible within it. The Japanese will learn. They'll develop counters. We'll develop counter-counters. This is just the beginning." Bassett spoke up. "Sir, how many zeros did we actually shoot down?" "None," Thach admitted. "We got hits on 2, but no confirmed kills. This wasn't about shooting down zeros. This was about surviving contact with them. About proving the pattern works under combat conditions." "We survived," Flatley said quietly. 4 Wildcats against 6 zeros, and we all came home. That's victory enough." Word spread through the carrier within hours. The weave pattern worked. Thach's crazy idea, the one developed from crossed matchsticks, had survived contact with the enemy. Pilots who'd been skeptical suddenly wanted training. The squadron's unofficial motto became, "Trust the Weave." Over the next 3 weeks, VF-3 flew 14 more combat missions. They engaged Japanese fighters 9 times. In those 9 engagements, they lost 1 pilot, Ensign Roberts, who broke formation during a chaotic fight and got caught alone. His death hurt, but it proved the core principle. The pattern only worked if pilots stayed together. Meanwhile, they shot down 11 confirmed zeros and damaged 8 more. The loss ratio had inverted. Where American fighters had been losing 4-1, they were now winning 2-1. On March 18th, Admiral Nimitz visited Lexington personally. He gathered VF-3 in the ready room and stood before them without ceremony. "Gentlemen, I've been in the Navy for 34 years. I've seen a lot of tactical innovations. Most of them fail. Some of them work marginally. Very few of them change the course of a war." He paused. "Commander Thach, what you've developed here falls into that 3rd category. The Thach Weave is being taught to every fighter squadron in the Pacific Fleet. You've given our pilots a fighting chance against a superior aircraft. That's no small thing." He pulled a small wooden box from his pocket and opened it. Inside, 2 gold oak leaf clusters, the insignia of a full commander. "Commander Thach, you're being promoted to full commander and assigned to train new squadrons on your tactical pattern. You'll rotate back to San Diego next month." Thach stood stunned. "Sir, with respect, I'd prefer to stay with my squadron. They've trained hard. Commander, more pilots need what you know than can be trained in one squadron. You're needed elsewhere. That's an order. After Nimitz left, O'Hare approached Thach. Sir, I know you don't want to leave, but he's right. What you've created here needs to spread. Every pilot in the Pacific needs to learn this pattern. I know, Thach said quietly. But you're my pilots. I trained you. I feel responsible. You are responsible. You kept us alive when everyone said that was impossible. Now you'll keep more pilots alive by teaching them. O'Hare extended his hand. Thank you, sir. For not giving up. For trying something crazy. For trusting that 2 matchsticks could show you something nobody else saw. Thach shook his hand throat tight. Take care of them, Butch. Keep them alive. Keep using the pattern. Always, sir. Always. On April 2nd, Thach boarded a transport flight back to Pearl Harbor, then San Diego. As the aircraft lifted off from Lexington's deck, he looked down at the carrier growing smaller beneath him. 42 pilots had deployed with him 2 months ago. 41 were still alive. 1 loss hurt, but without the weave pattern, it would have been 10 losses. 20 losses. Maybe more. The plane climbed into scattered clouds and Lexington disappeared from view. Somewhere below, pilots continued training on the pattern. Somewhere ahead, more pilots waited to learn it. The war would continue for years. Men would still die. But fewer men would die alone, chased by faster aircraft following doctrine that didn't work. That had to be enough. Back in San Diego, Thach returned to his old office in Building 408. Everything looked the same. The desk, the maps, the window overlooking the flight line. But everything felt different. On his desk, exactly where he'd left them, sat 2 wooden matchsticks crossed in an X pattern. Someone had preserved them under a small glass case. A note was attached. Sir, we thought you might want these back. They saved our lives. VF3. Thach picked up the case and held it to the light. 2 pieces of wood worth a fraction of a penny. 2 simple objects that had changed naval aviation forever. He thought about Betty packing them carelessly into a box, never knowing their significance. He thought about the night he'd crossed them for the first time, desperate and out of ideas. He thought about 41 pilots who came home because of geometry and trust. The phone rang. A new class of pilots needed training. Another squadron deploying to the Pacific wanted briefings on the weave pattern. The war demanded more, always more. Thach set down the matchsticks and picked up the phone. There was work to do. There were pilots to train. There were lives to save. The pattern had proven itself in fire. Now it would spread across the Pacific, carried by pilots who trusted their wingmen and believed that survival came from fighting together rather than dying alone. The training classes began the day after Thach returned to San Diego. 50 pilots crammed into the briefing room at 0600 hours fresh from Pensacola, eager and terrified in the way all new pilots were. They'd heard rumors about the Thach Weave whispers that some crazy commander had figured out how to beat the zero. Now they'd learn if the rumors were true. Thach stood at the front, holding the glass case containing 2 crossed matchsticks. He set it on the table where everyone could see. Gentlemen, this is what saved 41 lives in the Pacific. 2 pieces of wood my wife sent me from Pittsburgh. I crossed them one night because I was desperate and pilots were dying. From that desperation came a tactical pattern that's keeping our men alive. He paused, studying their faces. So young, most of them barely 23, 24 years old. The same age as the pilots who'd died before he figured out the weave. Here's what I'm going to teach you over the next 2 weeks. You're going to learn to fly closer to another aircraft than you've ever flown. You're going to learn to trust your wingman with your life. You're going to practice a maneuver that feels wrong until the moment it saves you. And when we're done, you're going to deploy to the Pacific and prove that American pilots can fight and win against the zero. A hand went up in the back. Sir, how many pilots have used this pattern in combat? 42. We've engaged enemy fighters 14 times. Lost 1 pilot who broke formation, shot down 11 confirmed zeros, damaged 8 more. Those are the numbers. Another hand. Sir, What happens when the Japanese figure out how to counter it? Then we figure out a counter to their counter. War isn't static. The Japanese are smart, disciplined, well-trained. They'll adapt. We'll adapt faster. That's how we win. For 2 weeks, Thach drove them relentlessly. Morning flights at dawn, afternoon flights in heat that made the tarmac shimmer, evening briefings that lasted until midnight. He taught them the geometry, the timing, the communication protocols. He taught them to anticipate their wingman's movements, to trust their instincts, to stay calm when zeros appeared in their windscreen. By the end of week 1, 3 pilots had washed out, couldn't handle the stress of crossing at high speed, couldn't trust their wingman enough. Thach didn't argue. Better to discover that on the ground in California than at 20,000 feet over the Pacific. By the end of week 2, 47 pilots were certified, 47 more who'd carry the pattern into combat. On their last day, a young ensign named Miller approached Thach after the final briefing. "Sir, can I ask you something personal?" "Go ahead." "When you deployed to combat with VF-3, were you scared?" Thach considered lying, then decided against it. "Terrified. I was betting 42 lives that 2 crossed matchsticks had shown me something real. If I was wrong, good men would die because they trusted me." "And knowing you were scared, how did you lead them anyway?" "Because someone had to. Because pilots were dying and nobody else was trying anything different. Because sometimes leadership means doing the thing you're terrified of because it's the only option that might work." Thach met the kid's eyes. "Miller, you're going to be scared in combat. That's normal. Use that fear. Let it sharpen your focus. But don't let it paralyze you. Trust your training. Trust your wingman. Trust the pattern." Miller nodded slowly. "Thank you, sir. I'll try." That's all any of us can do. The next morning, Thach watched them board a transport bound for Pearl Harbor. 47 pilots carrying the Weave pattern forward. He thought about the 50 pilots who died before he figured it out. He thought about Roberts, who died because he broke formation. He thought about all the pilots still to come, the ones who'd learn from these 47, who'd refine the pattern, who'd adapt it to new situations. A legacy written in wings and crossed matchsticks. 3 months passed. Thach trained 6 more classes, over 300 pilots total. Reports filtered back from the Pacific. The Weave pattern was spreading through every fighter squadron in the fleet. Loss ratios continued improving. American pilots were surviving encounters that would have killed them 6 months earlier. In June 1942, Admiral Nimitz recalled Thach to Pearl Harbor for a classified briefing. The meeting took place in a secure conference room at CNCPAC headquarters, maps covering every wall, red and blue pins marking the chess game playing out across the Pacific. Nimitz got straight to the point. Commander intelligence indicates the Japanese are planning a major offensive operation. Target appears to be Midway Island. If they take Midway, they'll have a forward base to threaten Hawaii. We can't let that happen. He pointed to the map. We're assembling 3 carrier task forces to intercept them: Enterprise, Hornet, and Yorktown. Every fighter squadron will be flying Wildcats using your Weave pattern. This will be the largest naval engagement since Pearl Harbor. Your tactical innovation is going to be tested on a scale we've never seen. Thach studied the map. Midway was a tiny atoll 1,500 miles northwest of Hawaii. Nothing strategic about it except location. But location was everything in naval warfare. "Sir, what's the expected enemy force composition?" 4 fleet carriers, approximately 250 aircraft, including at least 80 Zero fighters. Nimitz's expression was grim. "We'll be outnumbered. The Weave pattern might be the only reason our pilots survive." "When does the operation begin?" "June 4th, 10 days from now." "Commander, I'm attaching you to Enterprise as a tactical observer. You won't fly combat missions, but you'll be available to advise squadron commanders. Your presence might steady the pilots." Thach wanted to argue, wanted to demand a cockpit instead of an observer role. But Nimitz was right. He was more valuable advising multiple squadrons than flying with one. "Understood, sir. I'll be ready." On June 3, 1942, Thach stood on Enterprise's flight deck, as the carrier steamed northwest toward Midway. Around him, deck crews prepared aircraft for combat operations. Wildcats, Dauntless dive bombers, Devastator torpedo bombers. Hundreds of sailors working with practiced efficiency, knowing that tomorrow some of these aircraft wouldn't come back. Lieutenant Commander Wade McCluskey, Enterprise's Air Group Commander, found Thach near the island superstructure. "Commander, I wanted to thank you before tomorrow starts. Your weave pattern has already saved lives in my squadron. Whatever happens at Midway, we're going into it with a fighting chance we didn't have before." "How are your pilots?" "Scared, excited, ready." McCluskey smiled grimly. "Same as pilots always are before a big operation, but they believe in the weave. That counts for something." "It counts for everything," Thach said. "Trust and belief keep pilots alive when performance specifications fail them." That night, Thach couldn't sleep. He stood on the aft flight deck watching stars wheel overhead, thinking about geometry and trust, and two matchsticks that had started everything. Tomorrow, hundreds of pilots would test his pattern against the largest Japanese force assembled since Pearl Harbor. If the weave failed on that scale, American carrier aviation might not recover. But it wouldn't fail. He'd seen it work too many times. He'd flown it himself, felt the pattern's strength, understood its geometry. The math didn't lie. At 0430 hours on June 4th, general quarters sounded throughout the ship. Thach headed for the ready room where pilots were already suiting up. The atmosphere crackled with nervous energy. Everyone knew today was different. Today mattered. The first wave launched at 0600 hours. Torpedo bombers escorted by fighters heading toward the Japanese carrier force, spotted by patrol aircraft. Thach watched them disappear into the dawn sky, silhouetted against pink and orange clouds. In the Combat Information Center, radio chatter crackled through speakers. Fragmentary reports, call signs, brief transmissions that told the story of battle developing 200 miles away. Bandits inbound 12 o'clock high. Weave pattern execute. I've got one on my 6 crossing now. Good kill, splash 10. For 3 hours. Thach listened to the battle unfold through radio transmissions and returning aircraft. The torpedo bomber squadrons had been devastated. Slow, obsolete Devastators torn apart by Zeros before reaching their targets. But the fighter escorts, using the weave pattern, had survived. Not all of them, but enough. By 10:30 hours, the tactical situation became clear. American dive bombers had caught the Japanese carriers with their decks loaded with aircraft being rearmed. 3 Japanese carriers burning mortally wounded. 1 American carrier, Yorktown, damaged but operational. The weave pattern had worked. Not perfectly, 15 American fighters had been lost, but well enough. Pilots who'd survived reported that Zeros couldn't maintain pursuit once the weave started. Japanese fighter tactics built around individual dogfighting skill couldn't counter coordinated mutual support. That evening, as Enterprise steamed away from Midway, McCluskey found Thach again. The Air Group Commander looked exhausted, face lined with stress and grief. "We lost 43 aircraft today, but we sank 4 Japanese carriers. We broke their offensive capability in the Pacific." He paused. "Commander, our fighter losses would have been twice as high without your pattern, maybe 3 times. You saved lives today, a lot of them." Thach accepted the words, but felt the weight of the 15 pilots who hadn't come back. 15 men who'd trusted the pattern and died anyway. "War isn't clean," he said quietly. "We don't get perfect victories. We get fewer deaths than the alternative. That has to be enough." "It is enough," McCluskey replied. "Those 15 pilots died fighting, not helpless. They had a chance. That's what you gave them, a chance." Over the following months, Thach rotated through every carrier in the Pacific, observing combat operations, refining the weave pattern, training new pilots. The pattern evolved. Pilots developed variations for different scenarios. Weave against bombers, weave when outnumbered, 3-to-1 emergency weave when damaged. Each variation built on the same core principle: 2 aircraft protecting each other, trusting each other, surviving together. By November 1942, American fighter squadrons had achieved air superiority in most Pacific sectors. The Zero was still dangerous, still capable, but no longer invincible. Pilots who'd been terrified 6 months earlier now flew with confidence, knowing they had tactical tools that worked. In December, Thach received orders transferring him to Washington, D.C. The Navy wanted him developing doctrine training instructors, spreading the Weave pattern to every fighter squadron in both theaters. He'd spend the rest of the war behind a desk, which felt wrong until he understood the scope. His pattern would train thousands of pilots, would save hundreds, maybe thousands of lives, would change how America fought aerial warfare not just against Japan, but in every future conflict. On his last day in San Diego, before shipping east, Thach visited VF-3's old ready room. The squadron had rotated back stateside for rest and refit. O'Hare met him there now, a lieutenant commander himself, wearing the Navy Cross he'd earned for combat actions after Thach left. "Sir, the boys wanted me to give you something." O'Hare handed him a wooden plaque. Mounted on it were 2 matchsticks crossed in an X pattern preserved under glass, just like the originals. Below them, an engraved brass plate read, "From 2 small pieces of wood, a legacy of survival. VF-3, 1942. Thach's throat tightened. "Tell them thank you. Tell them they made this work, not me. I just showed them the geometry." "We made it work together," O'Hare corrected. "You had the idea. We proved it. That's how it's supposed to work." They stood together in the empty ready room where Thach had briefed his pilots 10 months earlier. So much had changed. 42 pilots had deployed believing in crossed matchsticks. 41 had come home. They'd fought 14 engagements, survived being outnumbered, proven that trust and geometry could beat superior performance. "Butch, take care of them. Keep teaching new pilots the pattern. Make sure they understand it's not about the maneuver, it's about trusting the guy flying next to you." "Always, sir. That's the lesson we carry forward." Thach shipped to Washington in January 1943. He spent the next 3 years developing tactical doctrine training instructor pilots and watching the Weave pattern spread across the entire Navy and eventually into Army Air Force's fighter squadrons. The pattern evolved, adapted, changed to meet new threats. But the core remained 2 aircraft mutual support geometric advantage through coordination. By war's end in August 1945, estimates suggested the Thach Weave had contributed to saving over 2,000 American pilots' lives. Impossible to verify exactly. How do you count the pilots who survived because they weren't shot down? But squadron commanders, intelligence analysts, and combat veterans all agreed the Weave had fundamentally changed fighter combat. Thach retired from active service in 1947 as a rear admiral, his career defined by 2 crossed matchsticks and a willingness to challenge doctrine that wasn't working. He returned to Pittsburgh to Betty and Sarah and civilian life that felt strange after 20 years in uniform. But the pattern lived on. Fighter squadrons in Korea flew the Weave. Squadrons in Vietnam flew it. Modern fighter pilots learned variations of it at Top Gun and Red Flag. The specific tactics evolved with jet aircraft and missiles, but the underlying principle remained unchanged. 2 aircraft fighting together will always beat a single aircraft, no matter how capable. In 1981, Thach returned to San Diego for a ceremony commemorating VF-3's World War II service. He was 76 years old, walking with a cane, but his mind remained sharp. They'd preserved one of VF-3's original Wildcats in a museum at North Island, painted with the squadron's markings from 1942. Young pilots gathered around him asking questions, wanting to hear stories from the man who'd invented the Weave. Thach found himself telling them about a desperate night in February 1942, about 2 matchsticks his wife had sent about 42 pilots who'd trusted him to keep them alive. "Sir," one young pilot asked, "what was going through your mind when you first crossed those matchsticks? Did you know you'd just changed everything?" Thach smiled. "I knew I was desperate. I knew pilots were dying. I knew I had to try something different even if it seemed crazy. That's all. I wasn't trying to revolutionize warfare. I was trying to stop writing telegrams to mothers. And it worked. It worked because the pilots believed in it, because they trusted each other, because they were willing to fly closer together than anyone thought possible." He paused, looking at the young faces surrounding him. The pattern isn't what saved lives. Trust saved lives. The pattern just gave them a framework to express that trust. That evening, alone in his hotel room, Thach pulled out the wooden plaque VF3 had given him 39 years earlier. The two matchsticks still crossed under glass, preserved forever. He thought about all the pilots who'd flown the Weave, the ones who'd survived, the ones who hadn't, the ones who'd taken the pattern and refined it, adapted it, made it their own. 2 pieces of wood, worth a fraction of a penny, had become a legacy worth thousands of lives. He thought about Roberts, the one pilot VF3 had lost. About the telegram Thach had written to his mother explaining that her son had died breaking formation, that he'd fought bravely, that his death had taught the squadron an essential lesson about staying together. He thought about the 49 pilots who died before he figured out the Weave, all those telegrams he'd never had to write because the pattern came too late for them. War demanded sacrifices, but some sacrifices could be prevented. Some deaths could be avoided. That's what the Weave represented: the refusal to accept unnecessary death, the determination to find a better way, the belief that innovation and trust could overcome superior enemy capability. Thach died in 1988, at age 83. His obituary in the Navy Times was 3 paragraphs long, listing his rank, his service record, his decorations. But pilots who'd never met him mourned his passing because every fighter pilot in the Navy knew the Thach Weave. They flew it in training. They studied it in tactics classes. They carried it forward as living proof that sometimes the smallest innovations, 2 crossed matchsticks, a desperate idea, a willingness to challenge doctrine, could change the course of history. At the Naval Aviation Museum in Pensacola, Florida, a small display case holds 2 wooden matchsticks crossed under glass. The placard reads, "The Thach Weave Innovation Born from Desperation, 1942. These matchsticks, sent by Betty Thach to her husband, Commander John Thach, inspired a tactical pattern that saved over 2,000 American pilots' lives during World War II and revolutionized fighter combat doctrine." Every day, young pilots pass that display. Most pause to read the placard. Some take photographs. A few stand quietly contemplating how 2 pieces of wood could matter so much. They're learning the lesson Thach taught, that innovation comes from necessity, that trust enables survival, that sometimes the smallest things, a matchstick, a crossed pattern, a willingness to try something new, can light a path through darkness. The Weave pattern still gets taught, not with Wildcats and Zeros anymore, but with FA-18s and simulated adversaries. The specifics change. The principle endures. 2 aircraft mutual support, trust your wingman. Those lessons transcend technology, transcend eras, transcend the specific conflict that birthed them. Because Commander John Thach didn't just invent a tactical maneuver on a desperate February night in 1942. He proved that when doctrine fails, innovation saves lives. He proved that trust matters more than performance specifications. He proved that the most valuable weapon a pilot carries isn't guns or missiles, it's the wingman flying beside them. He built a pattern from desperation and matchsticks. But it's remembered through the pilots who flew it, trusted it survived because of it, and carried it forward into every sky where freedom needed defending. 2 small pieces of wood. A legacy written in wings. A reminder that sometimes salvation comes not from superior technology or overwhelming force, but from a desperate commander willing to cross 2 matchsticks and imagine something nobody else had seen. If you believe their names should be remembered, John Thach, Butch O'Hare, Ed Bassett, Don Lovelace, Jimmy Flatley, and all the pilots who trusted the Weave share this story. Write a name in the comments below. Remember that innovation born from desperation can light the darkest skies, and that trust between wingmen matters more than any tactical advantage an enemy might possess. They cross 2 matchsticks. We carry forward the legacy they built.